We're going to get started with our next panel, so please take your seats. And before I get started and we get started with this panel here, I'm just going to throw out one more reminder. For those of you who are joining us virtually, you can submit questions for the panel at ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and we'll work them in the Q&A at the end. So, our previous panel really emphasized some of the challenges faced in dry times. Increasingly, our success in managing those challenges is going to depend on what we do during wet years. As Jeff noted in his remarks, we are already seeing some climate signals of increased volatility, less snow, more rain during wet times, and we're going to have to really plan ahead for what to do when the water is there. In part, this means updating how we think about storage. Fine-tuning reservoir management will become increasingly important in order to maximize the value of the storage space we do have. And there are some options for adding additional surface storage. But we also need to expand the use of our groundwater aquifers as storage infrastructure. This will require, among other things, new robust accounting systems. Groundwater users and those storing water need to have confidence that the water they're putting into shared groundwater aquifers will be there for extraction later when they need it. And those putting water into groundwater need to be credited for doing so. But this isn't just about water supply. The risk of damaging floods is also growing, and it will be important to look for ways to mitigate this. Promoting multiple benefits in habitat projects is one way to do this. For example, floodplain restoration efforts can provide habitat while also reducing downstream flood risk. We have an excellent panel here to help discuss all of these issues today. I'll introduce them right now. So, we have Mike Tognolini, who is Director of Water and Natural Resources at East Bay Municipal Utilities District. Aaron Fukuda, General Manager at Tulare Irrigation District. Sandra Kerl, General Manager at San Diego County Water Authority. And finally, Julie Rentner, President at River Partners. I'm going to get started with questions right now, and we'll start with Sandy. How do you plan for wet years? So you're in a dry corner of the state without expansive groundwater basins. What roles do built infrastructure, water recycling, and integration with parts of the larger state water system play in managing wet years and future dry times for you?
Great question, and I would say we have no groundwater basins. So we really, in living in the desert, have had to plan to ensure that we have sufficient supplies. And so in San Diego County, we kind of got our wake-up call in the late 80s, early 90s with the drought at that time, and we went forward on a massive investment effort to provide more infrastructure. We built a dam, we raised a dam to double the storage capacity in San Diego region, and we now have enough storage capacity and supply to sustain the population at 75% service level for 6 months. And so this is really critical in terms of having enough supplies. San Diego, we get about 9 inches of rain a year on average. We don't have much runoff. So having stored capacity is essential, as well as we've seen reductions in demand. If we have available supply, we can store that. So it's really put us into a very good situation, and it's critical for our sustainability and water reliability to have those storage assets in region.
Excellent, thanks, Sandy. Moving to Mike, East Bay Mud has been working with agricultural partners for some time now to set up a recharge and banking facility in San Joaquin County. Do you have any breaking news on those efforts?
I do. First, a little background, though. It's been over 30 years that East Bay Mud's been working in San Joaquin County. Just turned off? Hello? There we go. Sorry about that. I'll start over. So it's been about over 30 years since East Bay Mud first started trying to develop a groundwater banking program in San Joaquin County, taking water in wet years, storing it underground in their critically overdrafted basin, and having some of that water available to return to the East Bay to meet dry year needs. We've had a lot of missteps in 30 years, and really the timing was not right when we first started to develop the program. But that's changed. I think we've gotten to a point where we have solid partnerships with local water agencies in San Joaquin County, and importantly, we have a level of comfort with the growers in the region about the idea of an outside agency coming in and developing a banking program and having the ability to take some of that water out in those critical years. So we've worked through some of those issues, and the step that we're currently in is really a pilot program. So we're taking water, we have a very small pilot, taking water, putting it into the groundwater basin through in lieu recharge. There's a local grower that's taking water off the river when we can release some excess water, using that for their irrigation purposes, and then we're getting a credit for the water that's left behind that we can then later extract during a drought. So the pilot has advanced, and we're finally, in terms of breaking news, we've just now made our connection into our McKellamie aqueducts, and we're in the final steps. We've put a couple of drops of water into the aqueducts, and within the next couple of weeks, we'll actually perform our first extraction testing, which is a big milestone for us.
Excellent. Getting started. So there were some points in there about collaboration and cooperation I'd like to return to later. But for now, that recharge project has developed an accounting system to track deposits and withdrawals. That helps ensure that the water you deposit is going to be there later, and it helps you understand how much you can safely extract when you want to do so. Can you describe the process of putting together that new accounting system? What went as planned, and what were the challenges?
Sure. So one of the important steps in developing trust with the local growers was that East Bay Mud could not have a straw in the San Joaquin County groundwater basin. So the facilities, the wells themselves, needed to be owned and operated by local agencies. So that was a big part of the partnership. In terms of the accounting and the breakdown, the agreement is that water is diverted from the McKellamie River, delivered for recharge. East Bay Mud gets a 50% credit for the water that's left behind in the groundwater basin. And then as a part of the San Joaquin County Groundwater Export Ordinance, our permit that we obtained, there's a loss factor of 5% per year. So if we wait too long, there wouldn't be much water left to take, but we still see it as an opportunity to take advantage of water in these wet periods and put it to beneficial use. So some of the lessons learned, when you get down to the local details of actually managing and moving the water and getting the permits in order to make the diversions, sometimes a pump fails. And in some of these small irrigation districts, and what we had happen was we released water from Comanche Reservoir expecting it to be picked up at the irrigation pumps so that it could be delivered to the local farmer. And unfortunately, the pumps failed. So a portion of the water that we released over a period of a week or so was lost because we just couldn't actually divert it. So that things like that, little local details that you really have to customize these programs to the local conditions, and that's just an example of one of the things that we discovered in our pilot.
Okay. There's a lot of optimism about doing more projects like that, and it takes time to iron out the details, it sounds like. Yeah. So shifting to Aaron now, Tulare Irrigation District sees a lot of variation in supply from dry years to wet years. And you've been managing recharge projects for quite some time. This isn't necessarily something new for you. Can you talk about what's gone well in the history of recharge within your district, and where have there been challenges? And can you talk a little bit about how these efforts have benefited different players, so farmers, but also cities and communities?
Sure, thanks. Let me give you a quick little context to set the stage of the tools that the district has developed to operate as a conjunctive use district. We're very old, number one, formed in 1889, so we've got a long history of irrigation use, surface water use. We have 2 water supplies. We do have a CBP contract on the Friant system, and you can tell we're conjunctive use by the size. Our Class 1 contractor, the more firm water, is 30,000 acre feet, and our Class 2 supply is about 141,000. We were meant to bring that wet water in, recharge it in the groundwater, and use it in the dry years. We have pre-1914 water rights on the Kuya River. Total supply average annual is about 150,000 acre feet. That's dwindled about 50,000 acre-feet over the last 70 years. And about half of that, interestingly like that, half of it ends up in groundwater recharge, half of it is irrigation demand. What's worked well for us is the suite of tools we've built up over time. We utilize 300 miles of unlined canal, and it becomes like a big sponge that we incorporate into our aquifer system. We have 1,300 acres of recharge basins that we put that wet year water in, and I'll explain a little bit more where we're headed, but as far as benefits are concerned, that recharge has become, under Sigma, all of a sudden the attention's been on how are we using that. It's brought benefits to now new partnerships that we have with easily our two cities, City of Visalia and City of Tulare. City of Visalia, we have a new agreement, tertiary treated water exchange program that was led by the City of Tulare. We receive all of their tertiary treated wastewater in exchange for a 2-to-1 exchange for recharge water in excess of our needs in wet years under their well fields. The City of Tulare has an older recharge agreement with our irrigation district where we strive to get about 11,000 acre-feet of average annual recharge within their service area. And we currently have a 50,000 acre-foot credit. So in those big wet years, we're concentrating it around their well fields. Interesting, what we found is impacts to our region are not necessarily always driven by ag. If you look underneath our two cities who are dependent upon groundwater, there's a permanent drawdown. And so even in wet years, their groundwater levels are declining, while in the ag footprint, our groundwater levels increase during that time period. So we're working collaboratively together to use that recharge water to solve their problems. In regards to our farmers, the benefits are obviously supposed to be that dry year conjunctive use backup supply. Interestingly, under Sigma, what we're finding is that supply is gone. So there are areas surrounding us without any surface water that use groundwater continually. And that impact or that withdrawal from the system has caused a pretty significant impact to our theoretical credit account. And interesting, Mike was talking about a crediting account. We have now established a water accounting framework in our subbasin to try and account for those credits that go in the system. It's very difficult. I advertise daily. We're making it up as we go. As long as everybody understands that, I don't get yelled at too much. They save it for the weekends, apparently. But it has been a struggle to get everybody to understand that. But once we set up the buckets, explain the water rights, it's interesting. Even in what we call the quote-unquote white areas or the groundwater dependent, they've come to realization that they have not been putting anything in. They've been withdrawing that from their neighbors, and now we've got to figure that out. So our recharge programs are now elevating to new things like we believe our future is on-farm recharge. Some of the impacts we've seen, or some of the difficulties we've seen is development of recharge basins are very costly, and if you can only use them 1 in every 5 years now, or maybe even 7, they probably don't pencil out. So now instead of in Tulare Irrigation District 1 recharge agent, which is the district, we're arming our growers to be their own under our water accounting framework and tracking system. Now we have 200 recharge agents. They'll get credit for it. They can use that and bank it for their future use. So those are some of the things we have going on in our district.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. The life of an irrigation district manager, getting yelled at on the weekends. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit and go to Julie. We focused a lot on wet year opportunities to store water, but there are flood risks as well. Addressing those might require rethinking how we manage our river systems. You've done river restoration work that actually brings multiple benefits, making space for habitat, reducing flood risk, and providing opportunities for groundwater recharge by slowing water down. Can you talk about your success with recent and current projects? How has this type of restoration helped downstream communities?
Sure, yeah. And so let me just say it's an honor to see you all, and I wish I could see your faces more clearly. Thanks for that intro. So to take a cue from my friend Jeff Mount, I'll start with some doom and gloom here, which maybe folks saw this a couple months ago, the Arc Storm report that was in the New York Times, right? When we look at the climate projections and what warming atmosphere does to flooding in California, it is particularly scary, especially in the San Joaquin Valley. So where the Sierras are taller and where we rely more on snowpack to store water for our use in the summertime, that snowpack's going away. It's functionally a reduction in our capacity to hold water back. And what that translates to in the most extreme climate projections is an increase in intensity of the storm of record in Stockton by somewhere between 3 and 5 times the magnitude of the 1997 flood. So we're talking about the flood of record being 1997. It broke the flood management system in the San Joaquin Valley in 17 different places. 3 to 5 times that intensity will likely hit the San Joaquin Valley at some point in our lifetimes. That's intense. The magnitude of the damage to property and life is unfathomable. And so the good news, the flip side of the doom there is that the flood management community has been in a period of change. And we all know change is hard, right? That's like the theme of today, change is hard. The flood management community has been in a period of paradigm shift, really, for the last 15 years. And California has created, for the Central Valley, a new Central Valley Flood Protection Plan that gets updated every 5 years. And that really takes a solid look at multi-benefit projects. The original drive for multi-benefit projects did a lot of this pairing of flood safety and flood risk reduction outcomes with ecosystem enhancement, which has been, there's been a lot of good successes, and I'll tell you a few of those stories in a moment. But what we're seeing now post-Sigma, and especially what the drought does to this whole community of multi-benefit water managers, is it invites another, element of integration into our flood system, which is how can the large investments we're going to make in public safety improvement and ecosystem restoration, how can they also speak to water supply and climate resilience? So, a couple of great, projects that have that were born out of the disaster of 1997, frankly, and the paradigm shift in the flood community would be on the Feather River at the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Agency. So, to Tim's question about governance, most of the projects I'm going to talk about require either resurrecting local districts from the ashes of what once was, or creating JPAs to lead in, changing the flood system. But south of Marysville, which is a place where the levees broke and there was a lot of property damage, and you can still see the shadow of that flood damage in the community there today. 14 miles of levee were set back on the Bear River and on the Feather River, creating thousands of acres of new floodplain habitat. What that did for downstream and upstream communities is it functionally reduced flood stage significantly to the point that the existing levee system can safely convey outflow from the Yuba and Feather Rivers and not overtop or break the levees. It's a massive improvement for flood safety. It has its challenges because reducing water surface elevations actually does change the way land use planners think about what can happen behind the levees, right? So it's an interesting conundrum where you can make a river system a little bit safer, and it actually can, in some instances, stimulate the folks at risk, right? It can actually elevate property values and make more property and more lives at risk if that system fails. But that being said, the outcomes at the Three Rivers project on the Feather and Bear River is tremendous for endangered species. There's been amazing recovery both for riparian songbirds, which we have dozens that are either locally extirpated or on the brink, valley elderberry longhorn beetle, other species that are listed, and they cause a lot of regulatory conflict across California, and especially across the Central Valley. As well as salmon habitat. So Feather River and Yuba River salmon actually get access to more aquatic habitat as a result of this flood risk reduction project. So really like embodying the multi-benefit approach. Another amazing project I just have to name because it did change policy, and it's still, the reverberations or the ripple effect of this project are still being felt at the federal and state level, is the Hamilton City project. So TNC led this project with a lot of local partners for many, many years. It takes perseverance to change the flood system, but the outcomes are well worth it. Where the community of Hamilton City is up in Butte County. Sacramento River floods this community, and for a long time they couldn't figure out how to get federal investment in a flood system improvement project because the cost-benefit ratios don't work. So with the help of the Nature Conservancy, the Army Corps, and the local district there, we're able to make the case that if you can set the levee back from the river, the value of that restored ecosystem on the floodplain of the Sacramento River can push the benefit-cost ratio up to the point that it stimulates federal investment. So that was a policy-changing project right there, because the project proponents were able to demonstrate that ecosystem values worked into the cost-benefit ratio compel good public investment and multi-benefit outcomes. One final celebration that we had just 2 weeks ago, I think, is when I got the final map from the Army Corps of Engineers. I mentioned the 1997 flood and the San Joaquin system breaking in 17 places. Well, what happens in our water community when we have a big disruption like that is, and it happens during the drought periods too, but it happens in the flood periods, is right after the big event, multi-agency task forces get together, right? And everybody goes, what did we learn? What can we do differently? After 1997, the multi-agency task force, this is federal, state, local, even private entities are participating, looked at all 17 of those levee breaks and said, where should we maybe not rebuild the levee? Maybe where should we find non-structural alternatives here? Maybe are there places here where we should allow the river to flood back over the landscape? And one of those places, the only one that turned out to be a real project that we could implement, just a couple weeks ago, we finally got the final map from the Army Corps of Engineers that literally shows the abandoned levees on the edge of the river. The levees were abandoned in exchange for flowage easements over the land that now gets wet. What we've been able to learn over the last 25 years, while this has been in place but the paperwork hasn't been done, is that overbank flooding off the San Joaquin River has a tremendous impact on groundwater levels. Even you think when it's flood season, like when water is high in the river, water must be high in all of our groundwater, right? But it's not always the case, and we're seeing, especially as we study environmentally present radioisotopes in groundwater, that post, the dam building era of California's history, rivers are starting to provide, 2 to 3 times the amount of recharge into our aquifers than they used to before we dried out our system. So what we learned in that project is that overbank flooding off the San Joaquin River into the new flowage basins of the Three Amigos project is actually putting water back in the ground for use during the dry times. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's actually 3 years. We're still trying to figure out exactly how long that water sits around and creates a benefit. But the ecological outcomes are tremendous, right? So we're talking about thousands of acres of floodplain accessible ground to make the little bugs that Sandy was talking about to feed baby salmon as they migrate through the system. But then during the dry years like this, to support a whole host of other riparian obligate wildlife and wildlife that move through California along our river corridors. That's safe and effective, habitat for dwindling wildlife.
Julie?
So lots to celebrate, for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great way to end a first round of questions that revealed and introduced a number of different projects that have a lot of promise on the flood control side, on the water supply side. And when we think about some of the challenges that are coming in future wet years, that's going to require more of these sorts of big projects, and some big projects means permitting. So I'd like to go to Sandy and just talk about, in your recent efforts to raise San Vicente Dam, you were able to get a number of beneficial projects done under one overarching environmental permitting process. Can you talk about what projects were included, what the process was like, and how that helped your region sort of get prepared for the future?
We had a vision as an organization that we had a suite of projects that we called the emergency storage and carryover projects to enhance reliability of water in San Diego County. And these projects ranged from raising a dam, building a dam, putting in a hydroelectric facility, doing different piping to move water around the system. And we took a strategic approach to get an overarching environmental clearance for all of these projects. It was a heavy, heavy lift in terms of going through that process and working with all of the agencies, but it then was able to solidify our ability to move forward and get those projects constructed in an efficient and a timely manner. Our environmental staff out of our Water Resources Department worked extraordinarily hard to get this overarching permit, which has been incredibly successful in us moving forward on these major projects. The next major project that we're working on is a 500 megawatt hydroelectric facility in coordination with the city of San Diego at the San Vicente Dam, where we raised the dam. And again, that permitting process is paying huge, huge dividends. So it's really upfront identifying all of the species, taking a very comprehensive and thoughtful look at where we were going in the future, how do we best get there, and we found a lot of success with looking at it holistically as opposed to looking at project to project, which frankly I believe would have added time and money and brain damage to get there. My predecessor started that process, and it was really, I think, a brilliant move to take a comprehensive approach to how to get a whole suite of projects together that were built over 25 years to fruition.
Excellent. So, Julie, in your previous answer, you mentioned some paperwork. River restoration projects need to go through permitting as well. What is that process like for restoration projects, and how could it be improved to support multiple benefits? What else is needed beyond funding to scale up restoration work for the future?
So permitting is an interesting one in the multi-benefit framework, because if you're able to really design a project that meets multiple benefits, multiple water sectors believe it's a good idea to do this project, then surprisingly, our state and federal agencies in particular have a lot of programmatic pathways to permit that project, and fairly rapidly. What we find is that when you think really big, when you try to do a very big project or one that changes policy, you're going to find that it's a little bit more difficult to access those programmatic pathways. I think there's been a lot of great work done here in California to try to create new programmatic pathways and expedite permitting, especially for restoration projects. They need to think bigger. And so we certainly could use some more help thinking about how to make those permitting pathways faster for larger restoration projects. But to the kind of second part of your question there, what do we need to do more restoration, or to change the flood system, or to change river management in at a faster pace, because we see on the horizon that something big is coming? What we need is people, we need time, and we need trust. And you can't buy more time, right? So we need people and trust. So we find ourselves spending a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I get to that conversation where I'm sitting down with the irrigation district manager, or with the city manager, or with the public works director, and we're just in alignment. We're talking about the same thing. We understand that you know where I am and I know where you are, and we're going to talk about a project that we can do together that's going to speak to both of our interests. People. Need to hire more people. So anybody out there who's looking for a job or knows somebody who is, please call.
I want to follow up on that really quickly. So sometimes with these restoration projects, you kind of need to seize an opportunity when it presents itself. Either there's a flood or some sort of event that really lays the groundwork for a shovel-ready project to go forward. What kind of work do you need to do before that to make sure that you're ready with the people who need to be involved to make that project go forward?
Awesome question. And the answer is pretty clear. We kind of figured this out as a flood management community a number of years ago, is that we need to have not just a comprehensive plan for the vision of the Central Valley Flood Protection System, we need to update it regularly, because things keep changing. So the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which is adopted by the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, the oversight agency, is updated every 5 years. And the updates have been 2012, 2017, and it's about to be adopted in December, the 2022 update. And these plans have been getting progressively more detailed, more comprehensive, and more multi-benefit as they've been delivered. So they just need funding. That's it.
Awesome. So shifting gears a little bit, in many ways, reservoir operation lies at the crux of wet year management. A new approach, known as Forecast-Informed Reservoir Operations, or FIRO, can leverage new data and forecasting tools to help us use existing reservoir space more efficiently. For example, by enabling the release of some stored water ahead of a storm for downstream use or recharge, where the storm is then going to refill the reservoir. Mike, could you talk a little bit about FIRO, how this might factor into East Bay MUD's operations and what potential you see for this approach in the future?
Sure. I would start by saying I'm not an expert in FIRO. I say FIRO, you say FIRO. I'm not even sure which it is. But there have been successful examples of this approach. Sonoma County Water Agency has been a leader in this, and others are further along in the development of forecast-informed reservoir operation programs. But it's really an opportunity. So we have much better information now than we did years ago when flood control rule curves were set up about when a storm is coming and the magnitude of that storm. And we have some advance warning, probably a week or so. We know pretty well whether, for example, an atmospheric river is going to hit our watershed and cause the potential to fill up our reservoirs. So we have a chance, as you say, one approach is to, you have a chance to vacate reservoirs because you know more is coming. But I think the other approach is because you have some knowledge about whether a significant storm is coming, you have a chance, a week's notice to react and release a significant amount of water so that you can be protected against a potential flood event. So in our case, you know, we see an opportunity potentially to store water above our normal flood curve and provide that water for a groundwater banking program or other storage program. Over time, it would kind of be a way to regulate the storage as the water comes in. The challenge for us in our case is that we have some limitations on how much water we can move out. What is our capacity? If the storm is in fact coming and we're above our storage levels, how quickly can we move out water out of our reservoir to create that flood protection? So, you know, that's the constraint that we would be concerned with as we go forward. But I think it points out that there's a nexus here between improvements in flood protection and flood control and the ability to move water through the system and the ability for reservoir operators to take advantage of storage, maximize storage for water supply purposes.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Any other additional thoughts on FIRO? Yeah, Julie?
Just quickly, I'll follow up on that, we've actually seen some of this in action on the Tuolumne corridor where 2017 they moved just as much water as 97 but didn't break a levee. And it's because they were able to get very, very close, precise management based on forecasts that are much better than they were 10 or 20 years ago, and a wider corridor for safely conveying that outflow from the bottom of the dam in ways that isn't going to damage the system. So it takes a whole system approach.
I would just say that the work that Scripps Institution of Oceanography has been doing has been a game changer. We've been a partner with them from the beginning, and just the data, the quality of the data, the information that we have has been immensely helpful for all of the water agencies throughout the state, and really support the work that they're doing and want to see them continue. We're co-sponsoring a bill this year to continue their work on atmospheric rivers. We're hopeful that that gets passed. I think all of the agencies throughout the state will benefit if that moves forward.
Just from the two systems I manage, and we're using ASO flights is what we call them, so we can better forecast. And it's actually, you know, I think we're looking at a FIRO study within our Kuya subbasin, but we've used our current data to work with the Army Corps collaboratively to maximize water for recharge and irrigation demand. So that forecasting is the new world. Our old flood diagrams are not climate change adjusted. So I think it's a huge benefit.
So we've got new projects, we've got new approaches and learning to help better manage the tools that we do have. And I want to shift a little bit right now and talk about cooperation. to make all of this work and make all of this happen in the future. So Aaron, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the broader setting outside of your irrigation district. Not just in your basin, but in the San Joaquin Valley in general, there's a lot of interest in recharge, and in some places, maybe more desire than there is water actually available. There's a potential for competition and conflict over this water. You have partnered with a number of different stakeholders to get recharge projects done in the past. What are the keys for stoking cooperation and making sure that the basin is ready for a more volatile future?
Yeah, so when I first read this question, I was thinking, oh, okay, I know what the answer to this is, because I tell everybody, you know, when you want to strike up a partnership, just take them out to dinner. That's how I met my wife, right? And you can tell by my weight, I've made a lot of partners, right? And then I realized what the overall arching question is in relation to, I was thinking really hard about this, but it's combining, you know, this new Sigma world is combining the haves and the have-nots, right? And you're a have if you have surface water, and you're a have-not if you don't. And how are we partnering such that we can both accomplish something? And what I'm sensing out there, the way we've looked at partnerships and seen success is when the person who's looking to do a project and comes forward to the person who has the water right or the water to do the recharge, it's a ask, not a demand. It's not an assumption. And it's kind of like asking, hey, how can you help me? How can we work together? What I'm sensing in other areas and working with other people in areas where they went in and they did things such as opening up a fully appropriated stream, that just riled everybody up. The attorneys were brought out, and then now, unfortunately, the state board is stuck in the middle of that mess. And I've advocated for, you know, the state board should be informed on these things that are happening, but the folks need to be thinking more realistically about what the ask is, make the ask, and start asking folks to just partner on them. One of the critical things I see out there is the people that are working on recharge projects are putting in multi-million-dollar permanent projects without water rights. So then it's a backwards conversation. I'm going to build a multi-million-dollar project, get funding for that, and then go seek a water right. That means you're going to attack somebody else. And under that scenario, that doesn't make for a very collaborative working relationship. So I think my takeaway is you know, go eat a lot of dinners with people, enjoy the company and the wine and the food. But I think if you're asking, my recommendation to people who are asking, and I know I'm biased because I manage a contract and a water right, but ask us. And our board responded very well, and a case example is Self-Help Enterprises was working with the community of Okieville. They had some water quality and quantity concerns. They came to us and asked for help. We are now constructing a recharge basin upstream of the community at our irrigation users' cost to try and help them meet their quantity and quality concerns. We consider them a part of our community. And so an ask looks different than a demand. And I'll tell you this much, when you ask a farmer for help, they will help. So, and in the state of California, most of the water rights are held within the agricultural realm.
Excellent. So in our last few minutes here, I'd like to do a little lightning round. Same question for each panelist, about 1 minute each. And that question is, if next year or the year after were a wet year, what would be your biggest asset, or what would be the most important preparation that you've done to get ready for that wet year? What are you most excited about? So let's start at the end with Julie, and then we'll come on down.
The wet years are the really fun ones. So for us, we've put in place monitoring programs to see what happens ecologically when we do get overbank flows. We've sunk a bunch of test wells to see what happens to groundwater levels far away from the floodplain even when we do have overbank flows. We're really excited to learn. What we're really hoping is in place before the next water comes is a whole bunch more of these projects that will allow water to run backwards, allow water to sink into the ground, especially in the places that it's needed the most. And I think, frankly, there's already been a tremendous amount of improvement in how the system works, especially in the southern portions of the San Joaquin Valley. So I'm excited to see how those operate. But ecologically, the big years, the big wet years are the most exciting for us to figure out how the system can work in a restored state.
Awesome. Sandy?
I would say if it's a really wet year, we're just going to be thrilled we have storage capacity available to take that water and to keep it in region. I can't sort of imagine a super wet year at this moment, but what that would do for all aspects of the community, including everything from our trees, which have been definitely impacted during the drought, across the board, as well as increasing our water in storage. So that would be a very welcome event.
Aaron?
I'm just ready for the. I've been advertising. I'm going to get shirts made. I know it. I just haven't done it. I haven't had the staff look it up yet. But water is the new mood, right? So if it's wet, we're happy. If it's dry, we're sad. So I want to be wet and happy, and we're ready. We're ready to go. Our district has been, we've been conditioned to get it, and our game is ready for the next, elevation of that game. We are going to maximize our diversion turnouts and bring all that water supply in. And I'm most looking forward to really these conversations that these folks in this audience are hearing. We need the state. Greg has showed us that I'm most hopeful that the state recognizes in those wet years there are actions we need to take at a state level to ensure the next year is not a disaster. We've made critical decisions poorly, and they've compounded themselves. And I think we're all going to make different decisions. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Okay. Mike?
I think it's a great question, because during the dry years is when we need to be thinking about what we're going to do in the next wet years. And during the wet years, we need to be thinking about what we're going to do during the next drought. So it's a good question. Number one, we want to fill our reservoirs of course. We'd be ecstatic to do that. I think one element that we would want to focus on is locking in the conservation that our customers have been achieving over the most recent drought, so we can make that a long-term water efficiency saving. So something we did in the last drought very well, we'd want to do it again this time, is lock in whatever customer savings that we can and make some permanent changes in behaviors, fixtures, et cetera. And then, like Julie said, we've done our own river restoration projects for floodplain management for salmon on the McElmy River, and we'd love to see those restoration projects actually get flooded and provide the benefit that they're intended to provide.
Okay, well, it sounds like we put a lot of effort into getting ready for the next wet year, and you heard it here first. We've got mood shirts, or maybe mood rings, coming from Tulare Irrigation District in the near future. So what I'd like to do now is turn over to questions from the audience, and a reminder, so raise your hand, we'll have someone with a microphone come to you. It looks like we have a question right there. And please state your name and affiliation before asking your question, if you can, please.
Gwen Pratt, Director with the Del Paso Manor Water District. This is for Julie, and if I understood you correctly, I think what you said is when you have projects where there are multi-benefits, there are permits, it's for permits for multiple groups, multiple benefits, and those would be projects that would fall under CEQA, or am I not understanding?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's what I thought.
CEQA applies.
So I'm wondering, because you said it moved more smoothly when there's multi-benefit, so that means dealing with the CEQA process moves more smoothly?
CEQA and then specific projects, yeah, is what I meant to describe. So when you have a constituency that kind of traverses a lot of diverse groups, CEQA certainly is a simpler and easier process. But the specific regulatory environment is easier as well. When you find that the project you've described is something that lands on the desk of a regulator or an application processor, and they go, oh yeah, no, this is consistent with the mission of my agency, not opposed to it, it tends to move faster.
Thanks for fleshing that out.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, other questions from the audience? Okay, I see one in back.
Hi, Wendy Broly with the California Urban Water Agencies. So climate resilience can't really be achieved without thinking about the inequities associated with climate impacts. And in the dry strategies session, we heard a little bit about overcoming some of the inequities around disadvantaged communities in drought. And I'd love to hear from all of you, any of you, about how equity considerations are factoring into wet year strategies and how those strategies are evolving as a result.
Anybody want to jump out? Let's go Aaron and then Julie.
Yeah, so our board as an irrigation district board has looked at every community member. If you're a disadvantaged community, if you're a wealthy community, if you're an individual homeowner, you are a resident within our footprint. We represent your water needs. We are not keeping up with it, and we're going to be working on that recharge on behalf of everybody within our district. It's just a matter of there's not enough water to go around. And in the conversation specifically with our disadvantaged communities, it's interesting. They're not necessarily asking for equity in the means of my domestic well, but they're actually thinking about it more globally, that if there's more water supply, then both their employer and their home are probably made a little bit more resilient. So we're kind of trying to work on that message and that attack for our communities. Is more water supply is good for everybody. Now that's really complicated in a drought. I don't have that answer.
Julie?
I was just going to say on the side of flood management, we do have a pretty significant inequity in how we've invested in flood system improvements across at least the Central Valley of California, in that north of the Delta, north of Sacramento, has received like 10 times as much flood system investment from state and federal sources as south of the Delta has. We have lots of communities that are in harm's way in the San Joaquin Valley, but in particular the giant metropolis of Stockton, right, and Lathrop. There's lots of people who will be under 10 feet of water if we have a really big storm system hit and the system is overwhelmed. So we spend a good amount of time talking about this in the San Joaquin Valley. How can we attract more investment in the flood system and the structural improvements and the non-structural improvements that could be delivered to disadvantaged communities? DWR has set up some specific programs targeting small community flood risk reduction and trying to deploy public dollars to those communities. And it's a challenge for capacity limitation reasons and others.
I would just add that whether it's a dry year or a wet year, the focus on affordability is critical. We've made a lot of investments in San Diego County. And while we have a lot of resources, that comes at a cost. So looking at affordability, and you say the wet years, the one thing I didn't talk about is I think everyone's experienced who has a dam or an old dam, that there's been a lot of work with DSOD reducing levels that the dams can be at for need for repair. And as those repairs need to be made to create additional elevation in the dams, how is that funded? And we really look at affordability as a four-legged stool. It's the cost of the wholesaler, the cost of the retailer, and what the state and the federal government can bring in terms of dollars to assist with infrastructure investment. As many of you know, the federal government used to spend a whole lot more money on water many, many years ago. It used to be more of a 80-20, and now it's a 20-80 split. And to expect that those investments are going to be made on the backs of every ratepayer is very unrealistic, particularly in our disadvantaged communities. So looking at the long term, whether dry year or wet year, how is that affordability question addressed? The electric industry has had for a very long time a system to have lifeline rates and to support those who are least able to pay for the services. Water is a critical essential service. We don't have that in water. And so I think long term, that is the issue that needs to be addressed, because folks can make investments, they can be prepared for the wet years and the dry years, but how is that going to get paid for? And with the investments that need to be made, it cannot be made on just the backs of the individual ratepayers.
Go ahead, Mike.
And I'll jump in as well and say affordability is a big focus for us as well. We have about 30% of our service areas made up of disadvantaged communities. And Likewise, if you're thinking about providing enough water supply to meet all your customers' needs, you have to balance the cost of that water supply with the affordability question. Our system, East Bay Mud, we have a customer assistance program that offers a 50% reduction on water bills for low-income customers. We have about 9,000 participants in that program right now. One of the challenges of that is how to fund that program with non-rate revenue, and we've been able to do that so far, but it's continuing to be a challenge going forward because of Prop 218 limitations, et cetera, but that is an area of affordability that we're very focused on.
I'm glad we were able to touch on affordability. It's received a lot of attention following COVID, but it's really a long-term challenge that we're going to need to keep our eye on. Any other questions from the audience right now? I see.
I forgot one thing when Julie was talking about CEQA. One thing we didn't talk about was DWR under the executive order. It's interesting. If you're a environmental project with a recharge component, right, you have an exemption from CEQA, and DWR has a process for you now. It's a very simple system, but it does do the back check, and you would receive a CEQA exemption. So a multi-benefit would be looking for a recharge component in order to get that exemption.
I think we had a question over here.
Thanks. Ryan Ojakian with the Regional Water Authority. I didn't have a question until we started talking about affordability, but I think this panel really ties into that question, right? Because what is the opportunity to thrive with less? It really is groundwater recharge, right? That's how we take those wetter wets and actually utilize them. So formulating that question, I think we heard a lot about really exciting projects on this panel, but how can we do even more, right? That's really the question, because I think Julie hit it on the head, right? We've run out of time, but we have people, right? And we need collaboration, so we really need to identify all of those projects. The best information that I have, notwithstanding all the great information from PPIC, is the Department of Water Resources, water available for replenishment. They estimate 13 million acre feet potential in the state of California for groundwater recharge annually, right? How do we realize that potential? That's the question. And how do we make that potential tie back into this affordability question and the environmental benefits potentially from that? Thanks.
Right, excellent, thank you. So getting groundwater recharge done, but getting it done in a way that realizes opportunities for cost savings and contributes to affordability. Any thoughts?
A couple thoughts. We're in the early stages of implementation of groundwater sustainability plans across the state, and I think it's created a tremendous amount of momentum and motivation to pursue recharge throughout the Central Valley, and it's going to require money. It's going to require adjustments in how we deal with the water rights issues around making water available. But I think that the motivation is there. Everyone sees the need, and with Sigma, I think it's only going to be growing, the need to make our basins sustainable.
In conversations with our growers, that's the exact conversation we have with them. We're actually stopping construction of recharge basins unless a very specific reason, like a disadvantaged community, and we're converting over to the on-farm. And the interesting part was their conversations, we'll pay you to allow us to do the recharge. So we're flipping the conversation. Instead of, like I said, instead of one recharge agent, now we have 200. But that's an East Side Sierra's Nevada approach. There's a bigger need than that, and I think looking at Greg Cantrell's report and others, there's a conversation around the Delta and moving that high flow but high flow water that will not impact the environment, provide some flood management. And like Mike said, the problem with that is the dollars associated with moving that amount of water is tremendous.
Okay, excellent contributions there. I think we have a question from online.
So a member of the virtual audience would like to ask, do we have the governance structures we need to do this, to capture more water during these wet years?
So Aaron, talked a little bit about the water rights question. When it comes to governance, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, as long as you have the partnership, the willingness, and somebody that is going to lead the charge and do it, I think you're there. The governance that is lacking is that extra water that has to come out of the delta, that sort of thing. I don't think that. I mean, I'm part of the collaborative action plan, which hopes to be a part of that conversation, but we're not there yet either. But I'm very hopeful. And then I don't think there's governance around how do we get the money to do this, because we just now, I've always told my board, I think we were told there was a surplus, but we were spending a deficit. We just didn't realize it. Now we realize it. So the money is not going to be there. From the state side, it's not going to be there. Feds, it may be.
So broadening that a little bit from just the question of recharge or water rights, other governance improvements that people would like to comment on?
I'll just add
Go
that
ahead.
it needs to be customized at the local level. Each community, each situation requires a different approach. So I think governance locally is really critical in advancing statewide.
Okay. Local governance highlighted as an important point.
I think
Aaron, one more thing?
Yeah, there was a speaker from Community Water Center. I think he's right, though. You try and set a governance up and don't leave one person out from the table, you're asking for trouble. You've got to have everybody at the table from all the beneficial users.
So we have a question over in the corner.
Hi, Kathleen Ronayne with the Associated Press. Sorry if this was already addressed. I did step out real quick, but it sounds like we're talking a little bit about the tunnel, or there's a little bit of reference to the tunnel. Wondering if all of you could address how you feel about the proposed Delta Tunnel, and if you think that will help with, storing more water in wet years, and what your perspectives are on that.
Kathleen,
Okay.
holy cow.
Billion-dollar question. The tunnel, getting water to recharge areas. Would anybody like to take that on? Not entirely. Julie?
I'll just say this one thing for you, Kathleen, because we're friends. My husband went to UC Merced, and one day when he came home from school, from engineering program, and he goes, "Hey, I was looking through the old library. These old books, arrived for the library at UC Merced. Take a look. This is from 1980. You might like it. It's about water." And it was the description of the peripheral canal for the Delta from 1980. So California's been obviously interested and conflicted about this for decades, right? How are we going to make progress on it? I don't know. Decades.
It could be a part of taking big gulps in the future. So with that, we're about out of time. We're about to take a short break. But before we do that, I'd like to have everybody take a moment to thank our excellent panel. This has been a great conversation about wet year strategies.